isolation.
Yeah.
But yours was pretty wild.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's
The skill lights are going when I pass by.
Yeah,
today.
that's It should just be, yeah.
I heard David Bowie.
Okay. So does anybody not have or need the marriage cannons that we handed out last time? You guys probably don't have
The
them.
marriage canon.
We don't have cannons.
Cannons. Are they on the copy?
They are. They are. I can give you a hard copy if you'd like it.
That's okay. I'll have my annotated constitution.
The question is, what weight does it carry?
667.
Well,
Isn't that a legitimate
now I
question?
feel like it doesn't matter. I don't apparently can law. Real.
Don't get bogged down with such things.
Keeps the movement of sounding before.
I love that quote from Luther, wasn't it Luther? In our reading that if you have just men as judges, you don't need laws at all. That wise rulers will make the right decision based on individual cases.
Would you like a copy? Yes. Okay. So it's just tech and then ACNA. It's just 4 pages. Yeah. Does anybody else need it? No. Okay.
I got the digital.
Okay. Cool.
Hello.
It's Audrey.
Wow, where's the class?
Well, you just can't see them. There are actually 4 people here. But they are observing physical distancing, and so they especially are afraid of me, which is why you can't see them. So,
Is that why you're not a face shield?
you know, I'm trying out teaching in this. I'm wondering, how do you guys feel about either?
What's that?
Both safety and then usefulness in like as teaching, being able to understand.
To me, it doesn't make any difference what you use.
Really?
But that's my vote. Don't know.
The choir mask? You think I should wear the choir mask? Then I can't read my notes. I look down and I'm like,
I know, right?
I have to do this like silly thing.
I was mostly joking.
Yeah. Do people find it helpful to have the face shield or no?
I like it just so it's your face. So
Yeah.
Kind of like when you're making a zinger.
Yeah. Because I'm always a zinging, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, he was joking.
I know. Honestly, I feel like jokes are one of the things it's very hard to do in a mask.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you have Stephen Colbert's eyebrows, you know, and you can just like make it, you can just like literally arch it, which I cannot. As a child, I spent there's time I spent because I had a little phase when I wanted to be a magician, so I spent lots of time in front of a mirror, like trying to do things. This should not be surprising. If you've all seen the promotional photo of me with Ryan's wife. What's Ryan's wife's name? Mallory. I want to say Melody. I was like, that's not right. Mallory. And who's the other person? And it looks like I'm doing a magic trick.
It's on
It's such a weird picture. It's such a weird picture. They actually had made postcards of them, like a limited number of postcards. My plan last year had been to sign all of them in a gold pen and put them in the seniors' diplomas. As like, I'm a celebrity, let me give you a signature. But they were out of them. And then it sort of fizzled out.
I have a white Sharpie.
Okay, well, I'll see if I can, maybe I'll resurrect this plan. Maybe I can get, like 2 by 3 foot, like posters painted, printed for you guys, and that'll be your graduation gift. Oh, free copies of the baptismal video, yeah. Yeah, maybe we could get it in HD, 1080. It's amazing. You know what's funny, actually, or not funny, but so we're thinking about offering some sort of short classes. And so I actually did a phone call last week with a parish. The rector is an alum who wants to pay for this. So for us to go and film it in front of his congregation, which it would be like a 4-session introduction to liturgy that then other parishes could use. And we're thinking about doing another version that would be for priests who, like, I never really got good liturgical training. You don't know how many emails like this I get from people who are like, I never really got any good training, or I went to Fuller, I went to Beeson, I didn't really get anything. Is there, well, liturgically speaking, is there anything you can do for me? And it's like, well, I have this week in the summer, and then if you can't come for that week in the summer, which they're obviously like 1 week at, that's not very convenient. So thinking about doing a video version of that. So yeah, and hopefully, my hope is that that my sabbatical, I can finish the Anglican Liturgical Handbook. So there'll be like a photographed book thing to go with it. And they're looking for, I think they're going to see about a parish maybe sponsoring, because for sabbaticals we can get a semester paid for or a year at half pay, or you can like get a fellowship and to get the rest of the year. So a church may sponsor it, so that to have time to to do the book, get it done, and then maybe photograph it at their church or something, or I can just sign all the copies, and give them to their church. So, see, that was a joke, but you couldn't really tell because you can't see my face. Okay.
The problem is they would just go immediately to eBay.
Yeah.
The signed copy.
Right. Yes. And maybe that's what we need to do. We just need to auction my signature to pay for my sabbatical. That is what we have learned in this. Yeah, because the popularity, it's hard to quantify, really. It's nearly inquantifiable, actually. Okay. So I just have to say, Thomas Aquinas' question about the bug in the chalice became a reality today.
Oh yeah.
I consumed a bug when I took the sacrament this morning, and I nearly had a yellow jacket. I had to keep him away as I tried to keep the rest of the sacrament on the altar, as you noticed this morning. It was so windy. I went up at the beginning of morning prayer to remove the veiled chalice and paten because it was starting to like wobble around. Did they even try to light the candles?
No.
Okay, to what end?
Did the yellow jacket get in the chalice?
No, it didn't. I kept sort of discreetly pushing it away, and then I think it got in my hair, but I just had to let it go.
Yeah.
Oh, you pissed.
So.
Isn't the Ethiopian rite they have the ceremonial fans?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like again, I bet they were practical
That's what I've heard. It's
to
ostrich feathers.
keep bugs away. and stuff.
probably still are.
You probably still are practical, yeah. Who was it? I think Tyler said, if you did get the yellow jacket, that's why we have Father Terhune. So you just give it to Father Terhune and be like, you know what, you can probably handle this better than I can.
or Audrey.
Yeah, so it's a good thing Audrey wasn't there.
Hey now, guys.
No, with the yellow jacket. We didn't want you to get, bit and then,
I am fine as long as there's at least three senior high boys that have been in Boy Scouts. I'll be fine.
Okay.
That should probably have context. Sorry, guys.
That probably should.
Yeah.
That didn't sound right. But that's a segue into, I went Boy Scout camping with my son this weekend up in northern, or only like an hour north. But I think this weekend was the peak of the color. It feels like Saturday and Sunday maybe was, it was stunning. Saturday, that blue sky, it was stunning. It's really beautiful. You guys were stuck inside though, weren't you? Sorry.
I drove.
Did you?
I did
Yeah.
go for a drive in.
Yeah.
And then you just went to a Wisconsin bar and then you just walked around in the bar.
Maskless in a bar.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And
Is it-
Walmart. And
Did somebody actually go to a bar? Because
I don't think so. So that's what we call drinking Wisconsinably.
Can't see my face.
Right?
Right.
Drinking Wisconsinably is you go to a bar in a pandemic and
While
just
you're
act like
quarantined.
while you're quarantined and act like there's not a pandemic.
How else are you gonna play that game review?
That's right. I mean, yeah. So driving up was really interesting because I don't think I think I maybe saw one Biden sign, like yard sign, but it was, I think I stopped counting after a little while, but there were some upwards of 20 flags that said Trump, no more shit.
Yes.
Have you seen these?
I
Like
have seen
massive
no more
flags
bullshit.
and then signs, and I was like, wow, this is an interesting
There's like,
tone.
I'm confused if it's pro-Trump or.
I know. I thought I was like, I don't know if the grammar is really doing for you what you think it's doing for you, but okay, that's okay.
in a similar vein, on my drive, the most grim one that I saw was this little Wisconsin farm, and the sign said, "If Biden wins, our lives don't matter." And I was like,
Whoa.
Whoa,
that's a class 4.
that's grim.
Yeah, I was like, that
very grim.
was very sad.
Wow. Well, we should probably stop. Audrey's in Texas, so, but we're in Wisconsin.
Well, it's actually very nice here. I'm sitting with windows open. It's 65, 70 degrees in the breeze. It's beautiful. This never happens.
Amazing.
Yo,
Yeah. Yeah, we're sitting here with the windows open too.
There's a breeze. 65.
Yeah.
Or 55, I don't know.
Or 55, I don't know. Okay, so back to weddings today. Uh-oh, the video went out.
Well, I just see two of your
It's set to
heads.
the clapper.
They'll periodically.
What? It's set to a clapper?
that's awesome.
Oh, that's it. I need to. Is it back, Audrey?
That'd actually be a pretty funny prank.
That would be.
Set it to a clapper. I was getting a phone call. That's.
No, but now it's gone again. It was back. I tried to hit the speak button. I hung up. I'm back, and now it's gone. Excuse me.
That was great, Audrey.
Yes. Should do that during a sermon.
Stay there. Don't come back.
Okay, I'm gonna end and join again. Sorry.
You know what happened?
What?
I said, now that I have this figured out.
I know. It was.
Yeah.
Okay, now I see Father Older's face in real life and his picture.
A sign picture.
A side picture. Gold.
Is that a table? Oh, there we go. Yes. Oh, bunny ears, please.
Okay, I think we're back. Very good. Okay, so back to marriage. Marriage brings us together today.
Well, the quarantine does not.
The quarantine does not. That's right. Okay, I think we ended last time on the note of nullity. Nullity.
Oh, nullity. Yes.
The note of nullity. I was just trying to make an alliterative point there, but I don't know if it worked. Yeah, so I think we ended talking a little bit about nullity. And in that, we were talking about the last of the prayer book questions, which was, what was the form and matter of marriage? And the answer to the question, what is the essential matter of marriage, was what? Yes. Consent. Obviously the question of same-sex marriage introduces, also means that we have different answers to the question, what is the form and matter of marriage, right? Because certainly until same-sex marriage, part of the answer was a man and a woman. And Philip Turner, in his one of his books, I think he called it a 5-strand cord. So you had, man and woman, freely consenting, monogamous, lifelong, open to children, and argued that this was the 5 things that were constitutive of Christian marriage. So this was before the same-sex marriage was actually a kind of live question. Yeah.
Well, I'm just wondering about the freely consenting.
Yeah.
How would that work with, like, say, arranged marriage or something like that?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Are they not really married then, by that standard?
It can be arranged with consent, right?
Yeah.
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 No, but I think the question of arranged marriage is certainly, it certainly raises a nullity question. So there's a kind of, there's a couple different kinds of arranged marriage, right? You could have the sort of like cultural norm of, say, like Indian culture, right, where like it's just kind of how things are in at least in traditional villages and things like that. There's another where it's like your father forces you to marry some wealthy person in a sort of aggressively, you know what I mean? Like, which is a little different than like 2 families that like everyone agrees like the families make an arrangement. So,
But what if that's gonna make a treaty with France?
right, yeah.
And forestall a world war.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, it's certain. I think it certainly raises nullity questions. Though, I mean, one can arrange a marriage and at least. So, what kind of consent? Maybe the other way to put it is, what kind of consent is required? So this is another question that is very controversial, probably more so now. But Turner argued that a priest should, he argued that this was, so for those who were able to have children, so it's parenthetically assuming, okay, so obviously past a certain age, that's not possible. And also there are different reasons why one might be impeded from having children, right? Yeah? Against one's will.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so whenever I have this conversation with my parents, they always say, well, what about, elderly people who, like, they're widowed, and then they have a companion, they need it, the nursing home, and they want to get married.
Yeah.
And they can't have children. She's like, my mom's always like, are you going to deny them a nice little ceremony that, help them live out their last years? And I was
Yeah.
like, well, presumably, I said, yeah, yes. I never knew how to answer it properly.
Okay, so the openness to children, I think, presumes sort of basic logic, and that is that you're also able to.
Right.
So Chrysostom, in one of his wedding sermons, it seems that it was for a couple who was unable to have children. Like there was some known reason, I guess. Or maybe in the sermon he was referring to couples who tried and were not able to conceive. And his argument was that the marriage bed, itself speaks of fruitfulness, even outside of the specific conception, right? That the act itself is a generative act. So, of course, this also, it's hard for it to not then press the question about same-sex marriage, because this is not possible, at least without intervention, right? It's not possible without intervention. Okay. So,
So this is not an argument really against same-sex marriage, except for point 1.
Except for point 1. Well, I think the openness to children is that it presumes that this arrangement can lead to those people actually being able to produce children. I mean, until the same-sex marriage question, I don't think anyone would have conceived of this to mean anything other than that.
But people adopt and people
Hold on one sec.
people adopt and people have surrogates and
Right.
But a surrogate isn't I mean, call a spade, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Like the purpose of the.
Which spade are you referring to?
A surrogate isn't what this is dealing with here. I feel like it has a very, like, kind of intentional, and I think kind of like borrowing from Chauvet, like, the right within the 5-point chord, the 5 chords, is very tied up with a symbolic order of understanding of being an embodied creature that is capable of producing biological children. And like the right is there to partially buttress that, right?
Yeah, I mean it's complicated. I mean, certainly one of the ways that marriage functioned, probably maybe a bit less so now, but was to protect women, to create a place in which there was safety for them in having children. I mean, did that always happen? No, but that's certainly at least one of the intentions in at least certain cultures how it works. Okay, Audrey, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Jump
I have
in.
a question about situations in which there was a Christian couple that met all of those things on the board, but did not want children.
Right.
Or were actively trying to prevent children.
Right. Right. So maybe be more specific. Is your question, should you refuse to marry them?
So I think my question is, since we're talking about nullity and validity, like I
Right.
know Christian couples that
Yeah.
have chosen not to have children.
Right.
So what does that say? Does it even say anything in our current context? So I guess maybe clarification and conversation.
Yeah.
We never wanted to have children, therefore our marriage is null. Please nullify.
So that, I mean, it's a very delicate question, for sure. It seems to me that at least one of the questions, maybe one of the more fundamental questions is, what is it that one wants in marriage if, when it includes the conscious refusal of children?
And that could be fleshed out in premarital counseling.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I think any good marriage counselor would want to explore the question, right? Like, what would lead to that sort of mutual decision? I mean, it relates to, in another way. So, when meeting with couples for premarital counseling, most couples that come are cohabitating. And so the way that I've decided to have this question is slightly tongue-in-cheek, is to say, like after maybe getting to know each other, right? Maybe probably second session, I would say something like, okay, so you guys are obviously living together. So you are experiencing a good number of the pieces of what marriage is, right? You're having a common life together, you're having a common bed, you're having sex. So if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, why is it not a duck? That is, what are you looking for in coming to marriage if you have ostensibly all of the pieces, the sort of outward and visible signs of marriage? You share money, like all of these things.
Probably points 3 and 4.
The monogamy?
Monogamy and lifelong.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, and this is anecdotally, so I don't want to press this too far. But it was usually the woman in the couple who said something about trust and safety and certainty. That that basically that these pieces were there, but always with a very conscious possibility of the removal of them. And that created a great deal of instability, like internally. Other answers that would come up were things like, Grandma wants us to, Mom wants us to, or something like that. And so I just used it as an opportunity to keep gently sort of like pushing the question back to them. Well, why do you think your grandma wants that? Is it just because she's stuffy? Like what could be her concerns? Maybe I've mentioned this before, but Stanley Hauerwas, maybe I should just assign it, but it's not that long of an essay, but his essay, Sex in Public, How Adventurous Christians Are Doing It. And it's a great title.
Great on a book list.
I know. And it's such a Stanley provocative title. And his argument is that, among other things, one of the things that Christian marriage is a public sexual discipline, where you stand up in front of your grandmother and you say, I'm only going to have sex with that person. And everyone there thinks that this is an entirely appropriate and virtuous thing to do. And he's like, let's just think about it. And he presses into the fact that to write this sounds awkward, but nobody is feeling like awkward when they stand up, and you say this in front of your grandmother, and nobody's blushing. So that's his first point. Second point is that it's public. And he said this is, as the canons and as the other things we were looking at made clear, were essential, right? The rubrics. And he said, because one of the things so this is not a discipline, this is different than, say, like, he doesn't make this analogy. Say, you could take, say, like a Nazirite vow, right? Which is not communal, but is like entirely individual. Like you engage to take on certain disciplines. But he said, what you're doing here is taking on a public discipline, a communal discipline. So he said, thus, if you were at a wedding of a friend and you found out that he had somebody on the side, he said the nature of the marriage ceremony is meant to create like an actual emotional response in you that your trust has been violated. Not just this person's wife, but your trust, right? So that you should come up to that person and be like, hey, jerko, I was there. You stood up and you're a liar. And that is not okay. Like, you're my friend, and you lying like that is like a big, hairy deal.
To all of us.
And you lied to all of us. You lied to your mom. You lied to your grandmother. Like, this is not okay. And he's like, that's exactly what is supposed to happen. That's part of its character. Is that not just in the negative sense, but that there is that there should be a sort of communal reality to this that helps you, so that even the question of like, oh, should I do this, and the shame question of it being somehow known to other people, he's like, that's actually part of it. Like that's at least one piece of what's helping you, is the awareness that like people will know, and that would be terribly embarrassing and shameful. He's like, yes.
This is really one of my favorite songwriters. It's basically a song story where the character, he's a limo driver, and so he picks up this newlywed couple, and they see him he's driving, he's got his wedding band on, and they're like, hey, you got any advice for us? And I just want to read this verse. I've been meditating about it since the song came out over the summer. Well, I thought for a mile as I drove with a smile, and I said, when you're dating, you only see each other, and the rest of us can go to hell. But when you're married to the whole wide world, the rich, the poor, the sick and the well, the straights and the gays, and the people that say, we don't use those terms these days, the salt and the soil. And it's like done this like very like mock Johnny Cash kind of style. But like, I always like that idea of like, I think that's part of it, right? Is that like marriage is inherently not even about you. Is that it's taking you outside of that. Like, and I think very much like when you're dating, it's just, you're this couple, you're an item, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of separate, whereas, you're kind of taking it into the wider connection of relationships.
Yeah.
That's part of that like public shaming, but also, of making a covenant bond, but then also like open, it's about making
Public
yourself,
participation too.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, it's about like making yourself open, right, because, and then I think in like a sacramental way, it's like you're an icon for what God, desires.
Okay, so I want to read now, and for those if you have a prayer book, open it to the preface to the marriage rite, because I want you to look at the preface that is in the 79 prayer book, and the ACNA one is close, but is revised in a couple of very conscious ways in light of the 1662 introduction to the marriage rite. Okay, so just follow along and listen. Dearly beloved, we are gathered together here in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in holy matrimony, which is an honorable estate instituted of God in the time of man's innocency, signifying unto us the mystical union that is betwixt Christ and his church, which holy estate Christ adorned and beautified with his presence and first miracle that he wrought in Cana of Galilee, and is commended of St. Paul to be honorable among all men. And therefore it is not to be enterprised. Now, it skips here. Notice that their language there skips to what we see at the end of the second paragraph. And therefore is not to be enterprised nor taken in hand unadvisedly, lightly, or wantonly, to satisfy men's carnal lusts and appetites like brute beasts that have no understanding. Imagine saying this. But reverently, discreetly, advisedly, soberly, and in the fear of God, duly considering the causes for which marriage was ordained. Now, those causes are laid out in the first part of the second paragraph in the 79 prayer book, okay? Notice that how the ordering and language is different, okay? First, this is 1662, and following all the previous ones. It was ordained for the procreation of children to be brought up in the fear and nurture of the Lord and to the praise of his holy name. Secondly, it was ordained as for a remedy against sin and to avoid fornication, that such persons as might not have the gift of continency might marry and keep themselves undefiled members of Christ's body. Thirdly, it was ordained for the mutual society, help, and comfort that the one ought to have for the other, both in prosperity and adversity, into which holy estate these two persons present come now to be joined. Therefore, if any man can show any just cause why they may not be lawfully joined together, let him speak now, or else hereafter forever hold his peace. Okay, so
what are the purposes of marriage?
the purposes of marriage: procreation of children,
Avoidance of sin.
remedy against sin, mutual society, and help and comfort one for the other. So, interestingly, beginning at the first American prayer book through the 1928 prayer book, there was no causes for marriage listed in the marriage liturgy at all. They were entirely removed. So they were restored in the 79 prayer book, but in a different order and not exactly the same. So in the 79 prayer book, the union of husband and wife in heart, body, and mind is intended by God for their mutual joy, for the help and comfort given one another in prosperity and adversity, and when it is God's will, for the procreation of children and their nurture in the knowledge and love of the Lord. So the third good in the 1662 book is expanded and basically divided out into two. And then children is moved from first to last. And the introduction of the phrase that I think only appears twice in the 79 prayer book, both times in the marriage liturgy and both times in relation to children. The phrase, when it is God's will. So, as somebody who grew up as an evangelical, the phrase, when it was God's will, appeared all the time in our prayers. We were always qualifying our prayers with that phrase. And it's interesting that it's introduced for the first time in the prayer book tradition here, I believe. So if you're interested, I have an article on this that came out of the Anglican Roman Catholic Dialogue. It was about ecclesiology and moral discernment. So the question was about contraception. And so in what ways do Anglicans and Roman Catholics disagree about contraception? So part of the point of the paper was to argue that Anglicans and Roman Catholics teach in different kinds of ways, and thus Roman Catholics have specific teaching about contraception. Anglicans have teaching that is not analogously at the same level, and thus it's not a sort of like A to A comparison. You're actually comparing different kinds of things. So part of the thought experiment was to say, could you have a position like a Roman Catholic about contraception and be an Anglican without crossing your fingers? And so this was part of the purpose of this was to pose the question to Roman Catholics, was to try to invite them to see that the question was not exactly how they were conceiving of the question. That is, do you have a teaching organ like ours which teaches X or Y? And the answer was, our church is ordered differently. And so it's not the right question. But I go through the history of Anglican marriage rights, and then also the 1920 Lambeth Conference, which gave very sort of tacit, in very limited ways, permission, though of course it's a recommendatory body, for contraception in 1920. It's worth going and reading it just to see how they argue about it. It's very interesting. Certainly, part of their concern is a concern about technology. So it's not necessarily, like, some of it is theological, but some of it is just simply a concern about technology and its, like, intrusion into something so fundamental. Yep.
Not to get, this is good, well, when I've done, I've read around some of that and the Lambeth conferences around that time, and I know very much so at that point in time, arguments for contraception were very much so tied to eugenics and racial theory. And I was, a question I had, I remember joking about this with John Toddy and John Mack when they were in my first year, and John Mack very bluntly said, oh, it's just because these racist Oxbridge guys were trying to quell the number of black Anglicans. That was the first Atlantic conference where you had African, I believe you had representatives from the colonies. And so his theory was that, that clause and debating that was, partially coming from British and American.
Yes, I don't think that's true.
I don't think that's true.
No, I don't think that's true at all. I think what raised the question actually was the situation of serious poverty in England,
Okay.
and what extremely poor families were facing in the wake of unexpected pregnancies. So, yeah.
So going back to the 1662, which is omitted in this one. So
Yes.
if a couple comes to you and says, we want to get married so that we can have sex righteously according to God's law and in his presence, you would say, no, that is fulfillment of lust. You are brute beasts. Marriage is not for the purpose of sex, which is almost entirely contrary to what most evangelicals teach.
Yeah.
I
mean, I feel like my high school talks about this where, like, you just couldn't wait until, like, then it's going to be a free-for-all. Like, that's sort of the tone of the conversation.
Legitimate sex,
Right.
that is prohibited under 62.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just read.
Which then argues in favor of same-sex marriage. Because they are not marrying for the purpose of sex. They are marrying for fidelity, monogamy, lifelong.
Right. Except
And
that.
probably, and maybe the raising of children.
Except the language is procreation.
Yes.
So.
Here and there too.
Right. So let me just note here the ACNA revision, which has both of these two things in mind and sort of splits the difference between 79 and 1662. It's not included there. It's just the canons. The union of husband and wife in heart, body, and mind was ordained by God for the procreation of children and their nurture in the knowledge and love of the Lord. So they have now made it the first good. For their mutual joy and for the help and comfort given one another in prosperity and adversity. So they took the first two and combined them into one. And then third, to maintain purity, so that husbands and wives with all the household of God might serve as holy and undefiled members of the body of Christ. And now they add a fourth. And for the upbuilding of Christ's kingdom in family, church, and society to the praise of his holy name. So, as a sermon, you never have 4 points in a sermon, right? No, I'm kidding. This is interesting because while 1662 was set out, especially in GAFCON, as the sort of standard, and the ACNA also has it in its governing documents about 1662. The ACNA prayer book tends to be is of the large percentage of it is based on 79, and sometimes the changes are 1662 based, and sometimes they're not. This is one where they is very clearly looking at 1662 and revising in light of that, and certainly revising in light of the presenting issue that brought the separation, which was same-sex marriage. And as you'll see in the canons, is addressed with a kind of specificity that would probably never be there unless there had been a controversy. Like its means of articulation is conscious of the fact that this is a contested question, as opposed to like a question that everyone agrees on.
Where is 62 in the English prayer book tradition? Where's Cranmer drawing this on? Because, at least my understanding of medieval sacramental theology is very much so. It's not as it doesn't seem as well defined, articulated 4 points. It seems like the couple shows up at the church door, and the priest is recognizing what's already there, and they go.
Yeah, I think I need to go and look again. I think that there was some specific influence from some continental Reformed marriage liturgies, but I can't remember which ones. So I'll go and look today and bring that back the next time. Okay, so so we have this is Philip. This is Philip Turner, but this is not like Philip Turner's idea. He's suggesting that this is what we can see in the sort of best of historical Christian marriage teaching. This would be a way of summarizing it. Okay, so the question of nullity is front and center in the construction of the marriage rite. So I think one of the things that is often, at least for the person who is aware, who, if you're not an Episcopalian or an Anglican, you come to a prayer book wedding service, that I've heard people say, you guys had vows twice. Why did you have the vows twice? But what you have at the beginning is a declaration of consent, distinct from the vows themselves. And the declaration of consent is basically, and in fact, even that which precedes it, is a clarification that everyone knows what they're doing and is doing it freely, and the expectations are articulated, and everyone present gives their assent to it. So notice that the first question in the 79, into this holy union, so the NN there is meant to indicate that the full legal names are to be given here. Because notice the question that follows. Into this holy union, these two persons now come to be joined. If any of you can show just cause why they may not lawfully be married, speak now or forever hold your peace. So this is recognizing, one, that what is happening here has a direct relationship with the state's laws regarding marriage, but also, more specifically, understanding that the state has articulated criteria for marriage. So there's a lot of reasons why a person might not be able to be married. One of them, which used to be printed in the prayer book, is the table of affinity. So if you are too closely related to the person, you're not legally able to contract a marriage with them. That's maybe an obvious one. Another is the Jane Eyre situation. Do you have a mad wife that you've put away? Right? It's a real question. This is like not actually, I mean, this is not that theoretical of a question. Right? I mean, maybe some of you can have imagined, know of situations like this. It could be, age. Could certainly be, right? If people have lied about their age, and someone says, this person is actually 15, not 18, as they're presenting themselves to be. That would be a legitimate reason. Yeah.
Why would we get rid of that?
Sorry?
Like, why would we get rid of that table? That seems pretty important to me.
I think because it's probably less of a live question.
Sure.
I mean, at least sort of in North America, many people are not contemplating marrying their second cousin or something like that.
I think it's interesting too. I think that there's a degree where it's just social change built into it because, like, I think of with my family back home in Pennsylvania getting Pembroke married, like that would have been a concern because these people had all been, living basically in the same community since the 17th century.
Right.
So, like, if you're just going to the next little Episcopal church next, you eat at a diocesan, like my great-grandparents, they met at like, diocesan ice cream socials, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, the possibility of them being, that's what, they get married in the 1920s. The possibility of them being related was like very much a high, whereas like by the time you're in the 1970s and 80s, like the way that people move around
Yes.
and just think about community is so vastly different.
Right. And so related to this question of the table of affinity, Audrey, are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. I'm hanging in.
Okay. It looked like the video paused?
No, I see you moving around.
Oh, okay.
I'm right here.
Okay.
I'm moving around the house.
Okay, no, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure you weren't losing it. So related to this was the publishing of bans, which was the declaration that a marriage would take place. And this is included in the rubrics in the 79 on page 437. If bans are to be published, the following form is used. I publish the banns of marriage between these two persons. If any of you know any just cause why they may not be joined together in matrimony, you are bidden to declare it. This is the first, second, or third time. Father Seefeld did this for both of the weddings that happened this summer. He did it electronically. But notice the question, if any just cause. So the question that is posed to the community is before the wedding is not just lawful reasons, but other just reasons. What would a just reason be? He's physically abusing her. So he might not actually be breaking the law in the way that he's abusing her, but he's abusing her. So that would be a just cause why this should not take place. And thus somebody should go to the priest and say, hey, this is not okay. Or whatever. We can imagine.
And this is a protection not available in civil court.
Yes. That's true.
I have a question.
Yes, Audrey.
Does this connect to the current method of publishing in a newspaper or having to put a public declaration of intent to marry?
Let's see. It's not required in places, is it? Are you saying that? I'm not following the question. I'm sorry. I'm just.
So if I remember correctly, when Randall and I were married, we had to publish in a newspaper publicly that we were going to be married, so that, and I don't know what the reason was for it. Our priest told us we had to do it, so we did.
Oh, interesting.
Would that be in connection to this, so that somebody could see it and then put a ban against it? Should they have wanted?
Yes, I think that's probably what he was doing. I think he was sort of translating the publication of bans, given that, I mean, when in prayer book context, the whole community and the parish were all the same thing. I mean, basically. So that if you published bans, and they probably would have been published in written form on a notice board in the town center probably, but on the church, which would have been in the center, right? So I think what your priest had you do was probably, they were considering it a contemporary equivalent of that, to publish it in the newspaper.
And that's probably the social function of engagement announcements.
That's neat.
Yeah, that's right. Right, because you can imagine getting an engagement announcement and being like, that guy is a lech. Like, he's getting married? Oh my goodness.
Oh, that happens all the time in small towns.
Right?
And people try to break up the engagement
Or,
because it's wrong.
Yeah.
or, I had one at the church.
Can you speak up just so Audrey can hear?
Well, I was in a situation, but the church I interned at, there was a very old man who had a considerable amount of money, and his wife had died. And
Or had she? No.
Well, we're almost there.
Oh,
So it was one of those situations where there's, a woman, he was probably in his 60s or 70s, and a woman like in her 40s, began to court him, right? And what she did, cut off all his finances, cut him off from his children. You don't understand him, you're manipulating him, and wanted to basically go forward with becoming his life partner. And so I feel like in a certain way, like situations like that as well,
Yeah.
publishing bans would be, why should this not happen, right?
Yeah.
Would be that, this is, you always hear that case of like the gold digger, right?
Yeah. So the question is first in the wedding ceremony is to the congregation. Then a charge is given to the couple themselves, right? I require and charge you both here in the presence of God, that if either of you know any reason why you may not be united in marriage lawfully and in accordance with God's word, you do now confess it. Let me just read for you the charge from 1662. I require and charge you both, as ye will answer at the dreadful day of judgment, when the secrets of all hearts shall be disclosed, that if either of you know any impediment, why ye may not be lawfully joined together in matrimony, ye do now confess it. For be ye well assured, that so many as are coupled together otherwise than God's word doth allow are not joined together by God, neither is their matrimony lawful. It's hardcore. I mean, I wonder if everyone was so used to it that they didn't. I don't know how people heard it. So ACNA sort of adapts this in a slightly less challenging language. I require and charge you both in the name of God, from whom no secrets are hid, that if either of you know any impediment why you may not be married rightly, you do now confess it, being assured that those who are joined contrary to God's word are not truly united in holy matrimony.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I worked with volunteers years ago, and they came into the church, and they were coming from a different tradition, but they had a civil union only.
Right.
They went through confirmation, became Episcopal, the whole thing, but didn't feel the need to have their wedding blessed.
Right.
Would that be viewed as, because it was just a civil marriage, but they viewed it as just as relevant as having had a religious ceremony. How would it be a good way for, I wasn't in a place to navigate that with them, but what if that happens again? How would a priest navigate that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the encouragement is basically to, one, that receiving God's blessing on your marriage is clearly a good thing. Who would object to that? But also a way to, from a Chauvetan perspective, ritually enter into all that Christian marriage entails, and to sort of place oneself inside of that in a conscious way and in a public way. But I think that my guess is that for a lot of people, I think probably what they experience in the question is to raise a question about the legitimacy or the validity of their marriage. And that it feels like you're saying that they don't So and to raise a question about somebody's marriage is a big thing, right? If somebody were to come to, right? I mean, if somebody were to come to you and like raise a question about whether you were actually married or something, I think that would be deeply unsettling, right?
I'd get mad.
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is, something that's challenging about our own arrangement of marriage in this country, at least. C.S. Lewis has a famous essay where he argues for two distinct kinds of marriage, where he suggests that the civil marriage should be completely distinct, practically, from what the church does, so that your sort of legal wedding is purely legal, and you would go and you would sign the papers and you would do that, and then when you came to the church, it would be like, oh, this is Christian marriage, and it would be sort of like yes to all those other things and the rest of it, you know. There's also, I mean, I think my Anabaptist upbringing always makes me feel nervous about acting as an agent of the state. So I sort of don't like being the person who is executing a legal contract, because I don't think that's what I'm doing. I don't think I'm here to execute a legal contract. But it happens to be that this country permits all ordained persons to be the officiant of that, and thus I am. But that's just my that's maybe just my Anabaptism. I also felt it this weekend at the Boy Scout camp out. I was like, ooh, this is like militaristic in a way that makes my Anabaptist little 7-year-old self feel weird. Anyway, but that's enough about me. Okay, so after the two questions, then you have what the prayer book calls the declaration of consent. And so this is basically getting at the free and unconstrained giving, and a summary of what it is that you are what marriage entails. So will you have this man to be your husband, to live together in the covenant of marriage? And I think even using the language of covenant is intentional, like it's not a contract, right? It's something different than that. Will you love him, comfort him, honor and keep him in sickness and in health? And forsaking all others, be faithful to him as long as you both shall live. So we have the free, monogamous, lifelong, which are all being articulated explicitly, right? In the older books as well, there's a couple other things. The language with the giving of the ring in the older books. With this ring I thee wed, with my body I thee worship. And worship here is in the older sense of worship, which is honor. And all my worldly goods I thee endow. So it raises another question about certain things that might raise questions for a priest, and that is prenups. So this was a rule I had, that I would not marry anybody who had a prenup. One, it anticipates what it seems to go against the direct spirit of the whole thing, which is that you presuming this is lifelong.
How did that work at incarnation?
It was challenging sometimes. But the question is that, like, if you cannot share your worldly goods with this other person, then this raises a question about what it is that you think you're doing. Like, right? If you also don't trust this other person with your money, that also seems to be an indication that maybe like there's a problem, you know?
Father over.
Yeah.
I think there's a big problem with that when you come to second marriages, where there are children from previous marriages.
Yeah, so
And I'm not even talking about divorce, I'm even talking about widowhood.
yeah.
And especially with older couples who come in with large amounts of assets at the beginning of the marriage.
Yes. No,
That's where the prenup becomes important.
Yeah. So I think that's a different question. Sorry, I had this principle with people who were younger and first getting married. So I actually don't know if I had any older situations, but I've talked this through with colleagues, and I totally agree.
If there's either large assets or a disparity in assets at the beginning, if
Yeah.
one member of the couple comes in having inherited millions of dollars and the other person doesn't come in with a lot of assets.
Yeah, so there's questions about like the person who's wealthy coming in who would have given that money to their biological children,
Yeah.
right? So I think there are legitimate questions there.
Okay.
But I think that the sort of the younger person first marriage, that seems to be a different kind of question. Yep.
Can I
Yeah.
I'll lean back a little bit?
Yeah.
I don't know if it might be controversial or not, but, so you said that the Declaration of Consent kicks off really consenting monogamous and lifelong, but it seems like it also kicks off man and woman.
Where?
Well, it says, will you have this man to be your husband?
Uh-huh.
And then in the rubric says, the woman answers, I will.
Yes.
Celebrant says, will you have this woman to be your wife? Man answers, I will.
Yes.
So it's also assuming man and woman on your list.
Yes. Oh, yes. I see what you mean. Yeah.
But the consent does not include procreation or children.
No, it does not.
Which is interesting.
But I think that would be to misread it, because what prefaces it is we're telling you what the covenant of marriage is.
Okay.
So these are the goods for which marriage is ordained. So will you enter into the covenant just summarized?
Yeah.
And then it's adding specific things of what it would mean to enter into that covenant. So it would be to live together, to love, to comfort, to honor, to keep, whether one is sick or healthy, forsaking all others, monogamous, be faithful as long as you both shall live. Okay. We could dig more into the marriage liturgy itself. I think we'll stop there unless there are other specific questions about the marriage rite. Because I just want to note some things in the canons about when it comes to preparation. Are we good? Any other questions about this?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. So first, let's just note a couple things. So in the starting with the Episcopal canons. So conforming to the laws of the state governing the creation of the status of marriage. So a couple things here. So the couple shall notify the member of the clergy of their intent to marry at least 30 days prior to the solemnization. So this is also to preclude the possibility of quick marriages. So this is a practical way of expressing what is articulated in the beginning. Therefore, marriage is not to be entered into unadvisedly or lightly, but reverently, deliberately, right? So the making it not possible to get married quickly. So it says that this requirement can be waived for weighty cause, and I think it's imagining things like somebody is called off to active duty, somebody's mother is dying in Europe, and you need to go and be with them, and you were planning to be married in 2 months, right, or something like that. We can imagine these sorts of situations. So, prior to the solemnization, a member of the clergy shall determine that both parties have the right to marry according to the laws of the state, and consent. Notice that it introduces here the language that is often found in civil law around marriage, and it's reiterating it here. And consent to do so freely, without fraud, coercion, mistake as to the identity of either, or mental reservation. So this gets much more specific. So this would also include, people pretending to be another person or to be another kind of person. Somebody pretending to be a doctor when they don't have a high school diploma. I mean, pretending to be a doctor in general is a bad idea, but I actually, I had a colleague who did a marriage who the woman, if I can get this right, the woman discovered on the night of their wedding that her husband was a woman. I remember my colleague called me the next day and he's like, have you ever had this happen? Have you had a bride call you and say, I found out my husband is a woman? I was like, no. He's like, so legally this is pretty cut and dry. Like, he was also a lawyer. So he's like, it's not a marriage, so, well, that's over. But then you also sort of want to ask the question, so you're telling me you had no idea? Like, this is interesting.
That's proper Christian dating.
Yeah, so you were Amish, let's be clear, and let's just say nothing physical happened. It never crossed your mind? Like, there's nothing that gave you an indication? Okay.
You've seen the Crying Game.
Yeah. I have not. It's sort of... okay. So the conditions here, they list all of this. Basically, one is free to do this. That one of the parties is baptized, and that both parties have been instructed by members of the clergy or a person known by the member of the clergy to be competent and responsible in the nature, purpose, and meaning, as well as the rights, duties, and responsibilities of marriage. So this is the specific canonical requirement, obligation that priests have for premarital preparation. Did you have a question?
When did at least one get thrown in there? The marriage canons have undergone a tremendous amount of revision. So it's important, I think we talked about this in the first pastoral ministry class in canon law. Yeah. So White and Dykeman is the book, if you have questions like this, to go and look. So White and Dykeman is the annotated constitutions and canons that describe and give you the text of all of the variations that a canon has undergone, when it was changed, and what were the arguments for the changes. The marriage one is lengthy. Lengthy, yeah. So I honestly don't remember. I feel like it was 2012. I remember.
Oh, no.
No?
Oh, no. I think it's been there for a while.
It's been there for a while.
Yeah. No, long time. I mean, it certainly does raise the question. I mean, the nature of the marriage liturgy, like what it says, certainly poses a question to the unbaptized person. Do you want to say this? It, like, among other things, invoking God repeatedly while you make vows. And I think even posing the question, what does it mean? What does it mean to do this if you don't believe this? Is a question. Now, I think maybe posing it that aggressively might not be the pastorally wise approach. But I think sort of pressing into that question is a very reasonable question. And what does this disparity between the two of you mean? What kind of difference is this for you? Yeah. So as to marriage preparation, let me just give you a brief outline of what we ended up coming up with as our preparation as a parish. One of the things that became clear was that meeting, especially being in a metropolitan area, it was pretty common that both people did not live there. So it meant that meeting with them 5, 6, 7 times was almost like not possible. Like we'd try, and it just like, well, they live in Denver, you know, they're not gonna like fly in for this hour-long meeting. So one solution to this was that we did it as a weekend. We did a Friday night, Saturday, and we held it. I mean, it was a big enough church that we could have maybe 4 a year or something like that. And it was a kind of marriage prep weekend. And we had people come in to do sort of experts in different things. So on finances, on sex, communication, theology of marriage, dealing with family of origin, those kind of things. So some were parishioners and some were not. So that was the first thing we did. The second is that we had them do prepare and enrich, which is a premarital inventory that came out of I think it was the University of Michigan's. They've done the longest and largest study of marriage I think that's ever been done. I think it's something like in the tens of thousands of couples, which like for a study is enormous. And my experience is that it does an extremely accurate job of identifying things. Almost everything that I've been like, that seems maybe a little like, they will identify really clearly. So we have them take prepare and enrich. We have mentor couples in the parish, and you can go through a training online for how to read or interpret the responses of a prepare and enrich assessment. So all of the mentor couples have taken that. And so the couple who is about to be married releases the results to that couple and also to a marriage counselor. So they have this mentor couple that they meet with at least twice, and that can be like over phone or in person, depending on what's sort of possible. We also require that they did 2 to 3 sessions with a marriage therapist before, specifically to talk about communication and family of origin issues, and that the therapist got their prepare and enrich before their first session. So this might seem like a lot, and I think it kind of is a lot. But how we thought about this was, we want to do as much as seems possible for us to do to help identify reasons why they maybe shouldn't get married, if that's the case, and to equip them to help address the things that are there. Because everybody has issues when they come to marriage. The question is like, how severe are they? Some might be a sickness unto death. Some might not. And then I would meet with the couple a minimum of 3 times. So the first one was basically just a get to know them. So find out their story about them as a couple, and then them individually, if I didn't know any of that, and get to know them a little bit. The second session was to walk through the marriage liturgy and use that to just talk through a basic Christian theology of marriage. Then before that session, or maybe I think at that session, I would give them a printout of all of the scripture options and ask them to decide together what they wanted to use in the liturgy. And then the third session was to talk through all of the details of the liturgy. So who was going to do what? There's a decent number of logistical decisions depending on how many people, what the family situation is. And I also give them a chance to read through the vows together so that they're not reading them for the first time at the rehearsal or at the wedding. So to have some familiarity with them, I think, is helpful. So that is what we did in terms of preparation. Let's see. We'll do this in LT 601. So we'll walk through how to run a wedding rehearsal, and also some of the logistics about doing a wedding. Maybe the brief thing to say about a wedding rehearsal is a couple quick things. Having a policy, a church policy for weddings, is really, 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 really important. On the treasure trove, you can see an example of ours, which might seem overwhelming in its length. Pretty much everything in there, the things that are not allowed, are all things that happened. And so you end up, like, you can't have a Star Wars wedding, and you can't have a Jane Austen wedding, and you can't have a Klingon wedding, and whatever. But some of the things that are maybe more important are policies related to photographers and videographers. So where they can be and what sort of presence or not they can have. Have I told you about Sid Miller, my photographer as a kid growing up in a little town? Sid Miller was the main photographer for the Waynesboro Record, which was our newspaper. And he was at everything. And he still dressed like it was 1976. And he had like white patent leather shoes. And I just remember at the high school choir concerts of him combat crawling like down the aisle, like photographing like it was the war or something. And it's like the Glee Club is singing. And everyone was always like, there's Sid. Yep. So avoiding the, you're probably not going to have that. But what you can have are people visually inserting themselves in ways that you probably don't want in the liturgy. Another piece of this is what the role, most people now have a wedding consultant, some sort of person who's helping them run things. So what they can and cannot do when it comes to the ceremony. And basically, our rule was their role stops at the church door. So they actually don't have any role in the service itself, which is sort of funny that a wedding planner would actually have nothing to do with the wedding part. But it turns out there's lots of other things that are parts of weddings. We had, on the other hand, a wedding directress who was a member of the Altar Guild who functioned in that role for the church. So she met with the bride, and she would meet with the bride and their wedding consultant to talk through things. But it laid out everything for on our side of things. So that's really important. And then the rehearsal itself, wedding rehearsals are extremely weird and often kind of awkward because no one really cares about you or what you're going to do with this. And so it's a sort of weird situation of like, at best, sort of benign indifference to like your part in this, moving towards like outright hostility. So finding the right sort of posture and tone is really important. So contrasting that with being overly authoritarian, as you might guess, is not going to get you anywhere. So, but you also are running the thing, so you need to be able to run it without sort of being overbearing. So it's a kind of winsome balance to roll. And so the wedding directress and I would do the wedding rehearsal together. she basically handled physical placement of people and how to physically move to places, and then I handled everything else in terms of the liturgy piece. Maybe the best thing that I got from somebody in terms of wedding rehearsals is to begin the wedding rehearsal as if the procession in has just finished. So you begin with everyone placed, then go through the liturgy, and then you end by processing out, and finally by processing in. So that the last thing that they do at the rehearsal is the first thing they will do the next day. And if you can get them in, you, as the priest, can get them through the rest of it. Like, you can direct people. So if they can get in, we're good. And once it's over, nobody's really confused about how to get out, right? It's like the bride and groom are there, so they're just trucking it out, and then everyone else is like, let's go to the party, so they're ready to go. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Audrey, when do you head north?
I'm coming back on Wednesday, so tomorrow I should be in class.
Okay.
I don't meet with standing committee until 2 o'clock or 2:30.
Okay.
If that changes, I will email you. Otherwise, I'll just log on Google tomorrow for class.
Okay. So I'm just going to plan to do the YouTube and the Google Meet, just depending. So I'm just going to do it every time now, just because.
It's easy.
Now that I know how to do it, it just seems easier to then, people can always go and watch the YouTube if you missed it, or you can join on with the Google. I'm not saving it on Google Meet. The file that it creates is like enormous and ridiculously unwieldy, and the YouTube thing is way more efficient. So anyway, thanks, Audrey. Blessings.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. See ya.
Thanks, Father Owen.
Thanks. You're welcome.
Hey, I have a question for you.
Yes.
How many people
I'm not
are
sure.
talking out of getting married after they got out of counseling?
I did not have any.
Okay.
I have one that I actually have two that I wish I had, and both ended not well. One of them, the guy committed suicide, and it was shocking, but also not shocking. And the other was ended in a divorce, and one of the people involved, it was the child of the rector's, somebody who worked for the rector, and I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't refuse, and I think I wish I would have. So it was just so obvious that this was not going to work. Bad math. Yeah.
I didn't know we'd said that, but we should. No, we should have you. I actually have been thinking, do we need to have like a schedule of having people over? Good person over a couple weeks ago. That's what our first thing had. Yeah, a couple hours from doing it. Good key secret. Break it down. Russ. What about you? Oh.
basically that the argument that we need to trick the trees and not the that it's only seen as a spiritual presence, which I do see that, but I can't argue, so I'm like, huh? Yeah.
Who's arguing?